Most people think the samurai conquered Japan through a bloody revolution, but they actually stole it by letting the emperor keep his crown. Wait, is that even possible? If that sounds improbable, stick around and I'll explain this maverick move. Mind you, the history I am about to tell you is way more exciting than Shogun. Don't get me wrong, Shogun is phenomenal. The way it drops you into this completely different world, the politics, the honor codes, the brutal power struggles. Like you, I was completely hooked by how authentic everything felt. So in anticipation of its second season, I went down this massive research rabbit hole because I needed to understand the real history behind these stories. And what I found was way more fascinating than I expected. So I'm making an entire series about this. We're going to trace 700 years of samurai rule together. We will uncover how they stole Japan from the so-called gods, how they kept it, how they lost it. We're going to expose the puppet masters, the civil wars, the brilliant strategies that created centuries of peace, and ultimately, how the most successful government in history engineered its own destruction. And in order to understand how this whole system worked, we need to know how it started. And that brings us to one man. This man pulled off what I consider the greatest power grab in human history. His name was Minamoto no Yoritomo. And here's what's crazy about his story. The greatest military coup in history happened so smoothly that nobody noticed for decades. Picture this. The emperor, whom the Japanese consider as the most divine ruler on earth, reduced to performing ceremonies while warriors run his empire. How do you steal absolute power from someone who claims to speak for the gods? In this video, we will uncover Minamoto no Yoritomo's brutal rise and the military dictatorship called the Shogunate that ruled Japan for 700 years. This is the story of how Japan's most ruthless family grabbed the throat of an empire, or as I call it, how the Shogun stole Japan from the gods. For over a millennium, Japan's emperors ruled from Kyoto as living gods. But divine rule creates the perfect opportunity for manipulation. Enter the Fujiwara clan who figured this out in the 9th century. Why fight for the throne when you can control whoever sits on it? Here's their hack. Fujiwara daughters married emperors. Their sons became the next emperors. And who advised these young rulers? Their Fujiwara grandfathers. The Fujiwara had all the power but none of the responsibility, and if anything went wrong, the emperor will take the blame. And for centuries, this shadow government ran Japan while emperors performed ceremonies. For centuries, they maintained de facto power during what is called the Heian period. This marriage politics allowed them to control the imperial court without ever becoming emperor themselves. But by the 12th century, the power of the Fujiwara clan was declining. Here is where things get interesting. The Fujiwara were so focused on their fancy court life in Kyoto, poetry competitions, religious ceremonies, art and aesthetics. Meanwhile, out in the provinces, complete chaos. Nobody's collecting taxes. Nobody's enforcing laws. So these local warriors called the samurai started stepping in. Fine, we'll handle this ourselves, they said. They're collecting taxes, keeping the peace, solving problems. And slowly these warrior families are getting more land, more followers, more influence, especially out east, far from Kyoto, the old capital. The Fujiwara are writing poems while the samurai are building armies. As the imperial court lost its grip on the provinces, local strongmen began filling the power vacuum. They built private armies to protect their lands from bandits and rival clans. Over generations, These regional warlords consolidated into powerful military networks. And by the 1100s, two families had risen above all others, the Taira and the Minamoto. These weren't just random warrior clans, because remember, they were descendants of emperors who'd been kicked out of the royal family generations earlier. Now they commanded vast networks of samurai across Japan. The court needed their swords to enforce imperial law. But here's one thing. Once you rely on someone else's military, well, you're really not in charge anymore. And here's the twist. Both families descended from imperial princes. Remember these names, Taira and Minamoto, along with the Fujiwara pulling strings from Kyoto. These are the main players in our story. And one man from the Minamoto clan is about to change Japan forever. You see, the emperors had too many sons, so they'd give them new surnames and send them to govern distant territories. Those princes became warriors, imperial blood with military power. That's a dangerous combination. What the Fujiwara clan didn't realize is that they were creating their own destroyers. The Taira clan struck first. Led by Taira no Kiyomori, they crushed a rebellion in 1156 and positioned themselves as the imperial court's military arm. Kiyomori married his daughter to Emperor Takakura, becoming grandfather to the future Emperor Antoku. For 20 years, the Taira dominated. They controlled trade with China, amassed vast wealth, and filled government positions with their supporters. Kiyomori even moved the capital from Kyoto to his stronghold at Fukuhara. But could warrior blood truly mix with imperial divinity? The Taira tried to become court nobles while remaining warriors. This hybrid existence created fatal weaknesses. They abandoned their provincial power bases, grew dependent on imperial legitimacy, and lost touch with the rough warrior culture that made them strong. Now, let's go to our man. In exile, Minamoto no Yoritomo was plotting. Born in 1147, Yoritomo was the third son of Minamoto no Yoshitomo, who'd been killed in the Heiji Rebellion of 1159. The 13-year-old Yoritomo was spared execution only because Taira no Kiyomori's stepmother begged for mercy. Exiled to Izu province, Yoritomo spent 20 years in political wilderness. But this exile became his greatest advantage. While the Taira grew soft in Kyoto's luxury, Yoritomo built relationships with Eastern warriors who valued strength over sophistication. Now the question is, what would transform this exiled prince into Japan's most dangerous man? In 1180, everything changed. Prince Mochihito, Emperor Go Shirakawa's son, issued a secret call to arms against the Taira. Though Mochihito was quickly killed, his rebellion gave Yoritomo the excuse he needed. Yoritomo raised his banner at Kamakura, an obscure fishing village surrounded by mountains and sea. This location was no accident. Unlike Kyoto's exposed plains, Kamakura could only be approached through 7 narrow passes, which is perfect for defense. From this fortress town, Yoritomo began forging alliances with Eastern warrior bands. He promised them land, possessions, and respect, everything the Kyoto court had denied them. But promises mean nothing without victory. What followed was the 5 years of brutal civil war. The Genpei War. Taira versus Minamoto. East versus West. The future of Japan hanging in the balance. This wasn't just another clan dispute. This was a war for the soul of Japan. The Taira controlled the imperial court, the capital, the navy. Yoritomo controlled the eastern provinces, the cavalry, the hungry warriors. For 5 years, Japan bled, Battles raged from the mountains to the sea. But the decisive moment came in 1185 at the Battle of Dananura. The final battle came at sea. Taira ships versus Minamoto ships. When the tide changed, everything changed. The Taira were destroyed. Even the 6-year-old emperor drowned. Our man, Yoritomo, had won. But here's where Yoritomo revealed his true genius. Instead of marching to Kyoto to claim imperial titles, he stayed in Kamakura. Why would Japan's most powerful man reject the imperial capital? Because Yoritomo understood something the Taira never grasped. Real power didn't need imperial ceremony. He created a parallel government that controlled Japan's military class while leaving the emperor his empty rituals. In 1192, Emperor Go-Toba appointed Yoritomo as Seiyei Taishogun, barbarian subduing great general. This ancient military title gave Yoritomo legal authority to command all warriors in the emperor's name. But Yoritomo transformed this temporary appointment into permanent dictatorship. He established the Kamakura Bakufu, literally tent government, a military administration or the shogunate that answered only to him. This began the Kamakura Shogunate, Japan's first warrior government. Yoritomo built 3 government offices under the Bakufu. One controlled the warriors, one handled the paperwork, one served as the courts, all far from the emperor's reach. So what made this system revolutionary? Because for the first time in Japanese history, military men ruled openly. Yoritomo appointed warrior governors called shugo to control entire provinces and military stewards called jito to manage individual estates. These weren't court appointments subject to imperial whim. They were permanent positions backed by sword and loyalty oath. The shugo and jito answered to Kamakura, not Kyoto. The emperor kept his palace, his ceremonies, and his divine bloodline. But real power, that is military command, tax collection, law enforcement, belonged to the shogun. This dual structure would define Japan for the next 675 years. Emperors reigned while shoguns ruled. Divine authority provided legitimacy while military force provided control. And what price did Japan pay for this warrior revolution? The Kamakura system created a military aristocracy that valued martial prowess over learning. Court culture declined as rough samurai ethics replaced refined imperial traditions. The elegant poetry and painting of the Heian period gave way to war tales and martial arts. But this transformation also unified Japan under effective central control. The shogunate ended centuries of provincial warfare, established consistent legal codes, and created the legendary samurai warrior class. Yoritomo died in 1199, possibly assassinated by his own retainers. His sons were murdered by their Hojo relatives, who became the real power behind puppet shoguns. The Minamoto bloodline lasted barely 30 years. But the system Yoritomo created endured until 1868. The Kamakura Shogunate was followed by the Ashikaga and finally the Tokugawa, 7 centuries of military rule. Today's Japan emerged from that 1192 revolution when an exiled warrior rejected imperial luxury, built a fortress government, and proved that real power grows from strength, not ceremony. Yoritomo's choice to rule from Kamakura rather than Kyoto created the template for all future Japanese governments. Dual authority structures where ceremonial figureheads provide legitimacy, while practical leaders wield actual control. The Samurai Revolution of 1192 didn't just change dynasties, it redefined what it meant to rule Japan. So, how do we make sense of all these? It is this. The Fujiwara clan didn't wield swords, but they helped set the stage for those who did. Their long rule via soft power and court politics gradually weakened central governance. In that vacuum, the samurai filled it with armor, swords, and the will to rule. So ironically, by clinging to indirect power, the Fujiwara unintentionally paved the way for their own eclipse, replaced by a new ruling class forged not in palaces, but on the battlefield. But here's the twist. Later on, the shogun himself became a puppet. Yoritomo's own in-laws, the Hojo clan, murdered his heirs and installed child shoguns. And for over a century, they ruled while the mighty and young shogun sat powerless in his own palace. So, how did the conquered become the conquerors? For our next video, we will discuss the Hojo conspiracy when puppet masters made even the shoguns dance. That, my friend, is how the Kamakura Shogunate stole Japan from the gods. That's it for now. Stay curious and see you in the next video.